My name is Tim Alsop and I am the Technical Director of a security software vendor and SAP partner called CyberSafe. In my session, I will explain how single sign-on and multi-factor authentication can be used together whilst reducing the potential negative effect on user productivity and convenience. Most of the presentation will be spent on the demonstration, which is on the agenda as item number 4. I thought it would be useful to say a few strengths about our company. I think you will find that it's very hard to find any other company with the same depth of experience in the area of SAP authentication, SSO and MFA. Our existing customers and partners often tell us they appreciate and value our help, our responsiveness and our expertise. We consider the quality of service and support to be top priority, so if you choose to work with us, you will benefit from these standards. In this slide, I'm going to talk about single sign-on and also cost and productivity and authentication. You'll see here that single sign-on has an immediate benefit because it increases security and also gives the user a better user experience, and therefore their productivity is improved. And also the costs are obviously reduced, so the top right quadrant is showing the low cost area that everybody wants to be in. What happens typically when you introduce multi-factor authentication is that you kind of take a little bit of a backward step because the user has to spend a lot of time using MFA. Maybe they need to generate a one-time password, for example, which could take a few seconds each time they log on. So the aim really is to try and get up into the top right-hand corner where the blue dot is shown, where you're actually benefiting from only using MFA when it's required, but using single sign-on in other scenarios. And that's what we're going to be showing you today. So our products are called TrustBroker, and as well as being able to install and configure very quickly, they allow companies to have the flexibility to change how a user is authenticated when they log on to SAP systems, or to re-authenticate after they've logged on. If we refer back to the previous slide, most companies want something in the top right quadrant. TrustBroker can do both single sign-on, the red dot, and single sign-on combined with MFA, without the user productivity being affected more than it needs to be. That was the blue dot. You can also be assured that our TrustBroker products are developed to a high quality standard so that you can rely on them when users log on to your SAP business applications. One of the key benefits of our TrustBroker products is the fact that no additional infrastructure is required. The products are installed on existing hosts where your SAP applications are installed, and they take advantage of other software already in your infrastructure, such as Active Directory. As you can see, TrustBroker offers more than single sign-on. It helps you with compliance and reducing the risk of a data breach. I think the highlight really is the policy-based authentication, which is used to enforce MFA when required, and it helps you to reach the blue dot on the diagram I shared earlier. So next, I would like to show you a TrustBroker product demonstration. In this demo, I will be using SAP GUI for Windows, although our TrustBroker products work with SAP GUI on Mac OS and also on Linux. TrustBroker also works with other thick client applications such as Power BI Desktop, WinShuttle Studio, and Microsoft Office plugins like the EPM add-in for BPC, as well as Analysis for Office, Bex Analyzer, and many others. What I'm going to do during this demo is to show you various scenarios with SAP GUI, but also using Fiori. So for Fiori, I'm going to be using a mobile app called Fiori Client, as well as a web browser on my workstation. The SAP systems I'll be using are SAP NetWeaver AS for ABAP, but S for HANA is also supported by our products. So let's start by logging on to this system N1A. When I double click on the SAP system entry, it's going to log me in. I've got single sign-on. That single sign-on was done using Kerberos. The Kerberos protocol is used to authenticate me because I'm logged on to the workstation using Active Directory domain credentials. If I log on to this system, E1D, then I'm also going to be authenticated, but I've actually got two users in this system, one in client 800 and one in client 0. So I have to select which client I want to log into, and then it will log me in. So we've got single sign-on for two different systems. I'm going to come out of here now and show you what happens when we enable multi-factor authentication. To do to configure the authentication, we have a policy. This is the policy configuration. and in here I'm going to specify a rule called ping ID. Ping ID is the name of a multi-factor authentication product that I'm going to be using for this part of the demo, and there's a rule down here called ping ID which it's referring to, and what that rule is doing is checking to see whether my role is whether I have a role assigned called SAP BC user admin, and it's also checking to see if I have an existing session, and if both of those are true, in other words if I have the role and I don't have an existing session, then it will use ping ID authentication. So let's save that file that I've changed, and now the policy is active. What will happen now is anybody who logs onto that system who has that role and doesn't have an existing session on that system from their workstation will be required to use multi-factor authentication with the ping ID application. If you look on my mobile phone on the right, you should see a notification come through. I click on the notification and it requires me to use my fingerprint. So I press my finger on the fingerprint reader and now I'm logged in. So from a user's point of view, that's very easy, it's very productive, but also very secure, and it's only doing the multi-factor authentication for users who have that role assigned to them and also have existing sessions. If I do this to go to another session, you'll see that the other session that I've got now is not requiring me to use multi-factor, but I could actually modify the policy and use multi-factor for each of the sessions if I wanted to. So I'm going to come out of here now and log into the other system, and as you'll see, there's no multi-factor here because I didn't edit the policy on this system. So each SAP system has its own unique policy, and that allows you to configure multi-factor authentication only when it's required. You can put the policy and configure the product only on the systems where it's needed, only where personal data is or where sensitive information is. Perhaps you could just use it on production systems. It's up to you how you choose to use that functionality. What I want to do just before I finish this part of the demo is to log on to this N1A system again, but this time I'm going to ignore the notification. Let's suppose that my mobile phone and myself, I was actually in a network where I had poor connectivity, and the push message to my phone to notify me didn't actually reach my phone, but obviously I still need to log into the SAP system. So this is what the ping ID application does. We are just taking advantage of the functionality. Effectively what it does is it falls back to using a passcode. So if I now launch the ping ID application, I'm sorry that you can't see this because the application doesn't allow screen sharing, but if I look at my screen, it's actually got a 6-digit code which I'm typing in, and when I press OK, that now completes the logon. So one-time password based authentication is being used as a fallback. You could actually use one-time password as the main authentication factor if you wanted to. There's lots of different options supported by the ping ID product, as there are with the other MFA products. So what I'm going to do next is to move on to another part of the demo, and in this part of the demo I'm actually going to turn off the policy-based authentication just to go back to how we were. So this is how it was at the start with single sign-on for both of the SAP systems. So we're back to where we were, and what I'm going to do now is log back onto N1A. And you'll see now I'm logged onto the N1A system. I can run various transactions. So let's say I run SM30. I can use SM30 to look at tables because I've got access to it. However, if I want to run SM59, I've configured SM59 so that it requires multi-factor authentication. This time I'm going to be using Microsoft Azure MFA product rather than the ping ID. So just to show that we support multiple MFA products. So this time on my mobile phone, the Microsoft Authenticator app will be used. And in the Authenticator app, I will be required to prove my identity using my fingerprint. So I'm going to run SM59 and the notification appears. I click on the notification, press the approve button, and then it requires my finger. And now the transaction is going to run. So you can see there that an alternative way of implementing MFA is rather than doing it during the login, you're actually doing it at the transaction level so that it only gets needed when certain transactions are run that require MFA. You could, for example, put this on all administrative transactions or any transactions that have got access to personal or confidential data could be protected by putting MFA onto those transactions. It means that the user doesn't have to use MFA if they log onto the system and they're running different transactions that don't require MFA. And that's going back to the main point of this presentation, where we're talking about productivity. If the user doesn't have to use MFA when it's not needed, then obviously they're more productive because they're only using it when required. I'm going to open up my web browser and show you what happens if I go into Web GUI. So it's important to recognize that the transaction-based authentication needs to work with both Web GUI and SAP GUI, because if it didn't, it would present a backdoor to the user. So I can run SM59 and it will require MFA. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to run a different transaction, which is STMS. I've configured STMS to use a different authentication method. It's actually going to be using Active Directory password. So it's not MFA, but it's actually re-authenticating me. And as long as I enter the correct password, if I enter the wrong password, I'll get a message saying authentication failed. If I enter the correct password, then it will re-authenticate me and then run the transaction. So that's just another example of a different authentication method that can be used in the authentication policy if you didn't want to use an MFA product for everything. It still has some security benefits because you're checking that it's still the same user that logged onto the system by using the prompt for their Active Directory password, just to make sure that you know who they are running the transaction. Okay, what I'm going to do next is to use a different system. I'm going to use E1D and show you another form of authentication that happens after I've logged in. So as well as being able to run transactions, there are places in some applications where users are required to authenticate. An example would be in this transaction QE51N. QE51N is part of the quality management suite, and I'm going to just put some data in here that will allow me to demonstrate it. So if I do that and I press execute, and then I click on here, unlock. Right, so I'm doing some quality management results recording. I've modified the results, the measurement that I want to modify. I press the save button, and this is when it actually requires me to re-authenticate. And normally in the SAP application this would actually be using an SAP password, but in this case I've configured it using our product to use an MFA product called Duo. The Duo product you can see on my phone. Click the approve button and use my fingerprint. So different MFA products can be used all at the same time, but in practice you probably wouldn't do that. You probably have one MFA product that you wanted to use across your company. It might also be used for other things that the users need, like connecting through a VPN or maybe even accessing their email. So I've just showed how you can use multi-factor authentication with electronic signatures. The electronic signatures are not just implemented in this quality management application. There's many other applications that use this functionality. You could even write your own applications if you've got any ABAP development requirements, where you can develop an application to use the electronic signature functionality provided by SAP, and our product would just hook into that and change the way the user gets authenticated. So you can either use MFA or you can use an Active Directory password. One other common place where the electronic signatures are used is in PI sheets and also the banking module. Banking module is particularly important because if you're approving payments, then that could be considered quite important to make sure that the approval is actually being done by the right person. So multi-factor authentication, or even just asking for AD password when a banking payment is being made, is actually quite useful. So again, this is a form of multi-factor authentication or re-authentication after the user's logged into the system, which means that you're doing it only when required. You could offer single sign-on to the actual user when they log onto the system, but after they've logged in, you can actually deal with the multi-factor authentication rather than during the logon. And hopefully you can see the productivity benefits of doing that. What I'm going to do next is to show you what happens with Fiori. So I'm going to open up my web browser and log into Fiori on our system, and I get logged into the Fiori Launchpad and I get my tiles. Quite normal, you've seen that many times, I'm sure. What I'm going to do now is close that and just do it from my mobile phone using the Fiori client application. So when I go into the Fiori Launchpad through here, then I'm going to see my tiles. So this is single sign-on. Okay, user didn't get asked for any credentials, but you might want to introduce MFA for Fiori, and the way that we do that is through our product. If I just log on to this system here, GO1 is where our Fiori gateway is. So when I go into this table, maintain, okay, I can enable this policy. So there isn't time to explain this policy, but I'll just modify the policy by turning it on. And now what will happen is when I open my browser and log into Fiori, it will require me to use multi-factor authentication. And if you watch my mobile phone, you'll see I get approved sign-in, and I press my finger, and I'm now in. So again, as we've shown earlier with SAP GUI, I can make TrustBroker provide or enforce the multi-factor authentication during the login, but it's also possible to implement multi-factor authentication at the tile click, which is after I've logged in, a little bit like the transaction authentication that I showed you just now. So with this app tile, for example, when I click on this tile, it's going to require me to use multi-factor authentication, use my fingerprint, and now the tile is going to open the application, and the application is run. However, there might be some tiles where MFA isn't required. If it's less sensitive or less important, in this case I'm using a game, but obviously you wouldn't be giving your users access to games. That would be a silly thing to do. So there we go. Just wanted to use that as an example to show that different tiles can have different authentication. So I just want to summarize where we've got to here. So during the demo, we used Ping ID, Microsoft Azure MFA, and Duo products for the MFA, but other MFA products are supported by our product. So TrustBroker can support RSA Secure ID, Okta Verify, Semantic VIP. There's a product called MidEye, which is a very nice product used in Europe. Google Authenticator, which is free, and many, many more. So if you have any MFA product, just contact us and we'll help you understand how we can use that product to give you the extra authentication. And don't forget that AD password can be used as well as MFA, which is, for some people, that's enough for certain use cases, because you're checking that the user is still the same person that logged onto the workstation or logged onto the device or whatever, by asking them to re-enter their AD password. So just to wrap up the demo, hopefully you can understand how the TrustBroker products now offer the required flexibility to reduce the inconvenience for the user, effectively increasing productivity. When MFA is required, of course, this is important. So that's the end of the demo. Thank you for watching. I hope you found my demo both interesting and useful, and you now understand how MFA can be used without negatively affecting user productivity. We would like you to consider looking at our TrustBroker products, especially if you are preparing or deploying S/4HANA, as this introduces an ideal opportunity to improve security and user productivity, as well as allowing your users to benefit from the S/4HANA upgrade. We also hope you find time to contact us to ask any questions or to arrange a demonstration or workshop. The contact details for myself and our company at the bottom of the slide. We hope to hear from you soon, and I hope you have a nice day and stay safe.
you.